Don't believe the hype of the negative media. Yes, sir.
HYPE. Don't believe it. Hello and welcome to the Don't Believe the Hype podcast. A very wise person once said, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And that is the intention of this podcast. Our goal is to empower you to change your mind, and in doing so, you can change your life. To do so, you must be willing to transform your life from the inside out, and that is the reason you should be tuned in to this podcast. So if you're ready to be educated, motivated, and inspired to live the life of your dreams, then sit back, relax, and take notes, because you are about to be energized with some high-octane insights and wisdom designed specifically for you. So don't believe the hype of the mainstream media. There has never been a better time to be alive than right now, and you have everything you need inside of you to create an extraordinary life. So now it's up to you to change the way you look at things, so the things you look at will change. Because when you do that, you will gain complete control over your life, and nothing will be impossible for you. So let's get started with the Don't Believe the Hype podcast with your host, Coach Michael Taylor.
Welcome to the Don't Believe the Hype podcast, where the intention is to empower you to transform your life from the inside out. Contrary to mainstream media, I believe there's never been a better time to be alive on the planet than right now. And I like to think of myself as an irrepressible optimist with a passion for the impossible. And this podcast was created to provide you with insights, information, and optimism that can support you in creating the life of your dreams. But to do so, you must be willing to do one thing. And that one thing is, you must be willing to change your mind. You see, a very wise person once said, "Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And that is my intention, to challenge you to renew your mind, because when you change your mind, you can change your life. Tonight, we're having a conversation about redefining manhood and masculinity. And I want to begin by reading something I wrote a couple of years ago, because I've been doing men's work for more than 25 years, and it is my belief that the greatest challenge we have on the planet right now is to redefine masculinity. So I want to read this little thing I wrote for the introduction to one of my books called A New Conversation with Men. And it says, "It is my fervent belief that men are frustrated, tired, and hungry. They're frustrated because they are trapped in an old paradigm that no longer works. They are frustrated because they are searching for new and better ways to exist as a man, yet they have failed in this search. They don't know where to turn, and they are becoming desperate for a new way of being and relating as a man. They are tired of watching their families fall apart, their health deteriorate, and their wallets be emptied by divorce, materialism, and senseless addictions that rob them of not only their money, but their self-esteem and dignity as well. They are tired of working at jobs that they hate just to keep up with the Joneses. They are tired of the emptiness and feeling of meaninglessness in their soul that tells them that there has to be another way to exist, yet they don't know how to change. They are hungry for something new and different, and I believe that something different is a new conversation with men. I know this because I used to be one of those men. I know what it's like to be frustrated, tired, and hungry. And for the last 20 years, I've been removing this frustration, eliminating my exhaustion, and satisfying my hunger to become a better man. As a result, I will admit that my life is now working, and I feel happy and blessed to be a man. I wanted to share my story in hopes of empowering you to follow in my footsteps. I simply want you to become a better man. This book is written to assist any man who wants to do just that, become a better man. It is written for the man who is sick and tired of being sick and tired. And it is written for that courageous man who refuses to settle for mediocrity and wants to live a life of excellence. It's been said that there is no power in the universe that can stop an idea whose time has come. I believe the time has come for a new conversation with men, and there is nothing that can stop it. This book is written to start a new revolution for the hearts, minds, and souls of men everywhere. And my hope is that this revolution changes the world for the better. So if you pay attention to mainstream media, you may have concluded that men are the bad guys. We are constantly bombarded with images and stories of men behaving badly. We see stories of domestic abuse, senseless acts of violence, infidelity, corporate greed, child abuse, and the list goes on and on. So the question we must ask ourselves is this: are men the real problem? I believe the answer is no. Men are not the real problem. The real problem is too many men are trapped in antiquated roles of masculinity, which causes some men to act out in negative ways. And although men may not be the real problem, without question, men can become the solution. And joining me tonight is a man who is creating some of those solutions. His name is Michael Lauria, and he is the founder of an amazing resource for men called Forging Excalibur. He is an international men's coach, a podcaster, he's an author, he's a speaker, and he's the host of the Hero's Journey TV show. And Michael is a man who is definitely creating a new conversation with men, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome him to the Don't Believe the Hype podcast. Hello, Michael, how are you?
Hey, Michael. It's a good name, isn't it, Michael?
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I loved what you read out from your book, because what it really highlights is the conflict that men have been within themselves, the conflict that men have within themselves about how can I be a good quality man? How can I redefine my own manhood, my own masculinity in a way that serves the people around me and serves me and serves humanity as well, whilst feeling like somehow aspects of that are wrong in society. And so I just loved what you wrote out. So thank you for that.
Well, again, I've been following your work for a while and so glad to have you on this show. And we're going to jump into your work. But before we do, let's start off with a few icebreakers. So first of all, tell us where you're from, and also tell us a little bit about growing up when you were in high school. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, I live in Melbourne, Australia, and I grew up in Sydney, Australia. Your question about growing up in high school, it's a very interesting one because we all have a different experience, but I think underlying our experience of growing up and going to high school and all of that, we really begin to develop a sense of identity and a sense of self about who we are as a young man and who we wish to become. And we always look, as teenagers in high school, we always look to the primary male role models in our lives. And they can be our fathers, our uncles, our grandfathers, our teachers, other male role models in our lives as well, for who to become and how and who to emulate, and what attributes and traits we admire in them that we seek to, I guess, embody within ourselves as well. And so that's a very different experience for all boys and all young men. And it's entirely dependent upon who they had around them as role models as they were growing up. So for me, I had a very traditional Italian upbringing. So my parents are from Italy, my grandparents are from Italy, and so, and more specifically, Sicily. And so there's an attitude there of, the man earns the money, provides and protects the family, and his wife will look after the children, cook and clean and do all of that. And so as we have moved into a different era of humanity, we're finding that those roles are very different these days, and for good reason, because there was a time in history when women didn't have or didn't feel like they could be any more than a wife and a mother. And so I think a lot of what's happened over the last 30 or 40 years around the women's rights movement and some aspects of feminism, I think are really, really good because they've helped to empower women to take their place in society where they always belonged. But I think they are taking on roles now that are much more conducive with us to support a society that is a little bit more not just inclusive, but also a little bit more well-rounded, having that masculine energy, but also mixed with the female feminine energy as well. I think that's a good thing. When I was growing up, it was the opposite. So as a teenager, we had those really traditional roles with our parents, and my experience growing up as a teenager was very much that. It was very much around, well, I'm going to grow up, I'm going to have a career, I'm going to earn the money, get married, have children, and my wife is going to be essentially a clone of my mother. And you have these unconscious beliefs around how you think things should be. And then, of course, when I got married at 21, 22, which was very young, the world was changing and I did not keep up with the changes. I just had this paradigm of this is the way that a relationship was and this is what it was meant to be. And if it wasn't like that, it was wrong. And I was in for a very, very rude awakening very, very quickly, in that there was an expectation of me to contribute to all of the things that my mother used to do in my own household, and that I still had to perform the role of a man, which is the provider, the protector, and all of that. So very, very interesting growing up in the 70s and 80s, this 1970s and 1980s, because that's as the women's rights movement was really taking hold in the 70s and gaining some traction. And then throughout the 80s, we found women in what used to be more male-dominated roles in the workforce, for instance, and equality was beginning to be a conversation. And there was all this stuff happening. It was really very interesting to live through as a teenager and into my 20s, because that went through into the 90s as well, in this changing world of male and female roles, not just in society, but in intimate relationships too.
Yeah, we're going to jump deeper into that because you've laid the groundwork for what we're going to be talking about. So now I just want you to do a couple of sentence completions, okay? So I'm going to start the sentence and I want you to complete it. First of all, I really love to
create.
My superpower is
seeing into someone's soul, parts of them that they don't even know is there.
I am proud of
who I've become.
Life is
a constant journey of self-awareness and growth.
One thing I would like to change about the world is
just one thing. One thing I would like to change about the world is our ability to find connection with each other above everything else.
Nice. So here's my first question for
that
you.
Last one, Michael, that last one, given what's happening in the world these days, that last one was an unfair question.
So many things we want to change, right?
Oh, absolutely. But that's all right. I think if we seek connection with each other, deeper connection with each other and deeper understanding and also awareness of ourselves and our projections, our unconscious projections and unconscious bias and all of those good things, I think we would live in a very different world.
Well, ultimately, I think that's the solution to most of the problems in our work.
Yep.
When we
Absolutely.
learn to connect and understand and recognize our humanness and our connection to one another, a lot of the issues that we're dealing with would just sort of disappear. So that's a great thought to have. Now, so Michael, I want to get your perception, and obviously we all have them, of the current state of masculinity. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future in general for men? Where are you right now with that?
I'll tell you about my journey around this because it started when I was in my early 20s and I was indifferent back then. I was indifferent. I didn't care. People were just people and I didn't really draw the difference between men, women, femininity, masculinity, or understand even the importance of both. So when I got divorced from when my first marriage ended and there was a divorce there, that was in my early 30s. I went on this journey of self-discovery and began to understand more about masculinity and more about what it means to be a man and more about who I wasn't in my 20s that I probably could have been. And then perhaps I would have had different results in my life, better results. So I went on this journey and then I moved from indifferent to curious and interested about what was this thing? What does masculinity actually mean? What's its place in the world? Do men really embody masculinity in the traditional sense of the word, or does that need to change? Does our definition need to change? Do we need to redefine what it means? Do we need to rediscover in this new world that we're moving into? This is me, 18 years ago. In this new world that we're moving into, do we need to rediscover what that means for men? And what are some of the virtuous attributes and traits that we need to embody as men in order to be at our best and to really embody the masculine within us, but also honor the feminine within us as well, because that's also important. And then I went on this journey of archetypes and shadow and consciousness and, Carl Jung's teachings and Joseph Campbell's teachings around the hero's journey as well. And I started to begin to understand that we're all on a hero's journey, and we all, and as men, we have to go on a hero's journey to understand who we are at our deepest possible level that we possibly can, and at our very core, and then to bring some of these virtuous attributes and traits to the surface and live life according to them. And so, in answer to your question, I would say that, for men to discover who they are at their core and to practice what it means to be a man, and in my definition, that would be a self-aware individual who can navigate life without unconsciously projecting his insecurities onto others, to seek to be of service and contribution to his family, his community, and humanity if he feels that way inspired to do so, and to, in every moment, as much as possible, have a level of self-awareness that ensures we are always coming from a place of love, but also empowered embodiment, integrating all aspects of ourselves so that we can show up in the world in a way that is of service and contribution.
Yeah, interesting, because you and I have very, very similar stories, going through the divorce and having that wake-up call, if you will, that challenges us to begin that inner journey. So with that being said, for the man who's watching this, he may not understand what we mean when we say, do the work. So the work, how would you explain it to a man who has not done his work? How would you explain the work? What is the work for you? What does that mean?
So the work is well, there's so much in that question, but I would say the work begins with integrity and self-accountability and self-responsibility. So the work begins with responsibility, actually looking at ourselves and our results in life and saying, where do my results serve me and where do they not? What do I truly value? Do I know what I truly value beyond love and family and all that sort of stuff? Do I know what I truly value? Do I have some sense of purpose in life? Am I seeking to better myself and make a contribution to the world that makes my existence here on planet Earth in this human form worthwhile beyond just being a good father, a good partner, and possibly a good man? Is there something that I want to leave as a legacy? And then diving deep into that and getting honest with ourselves around who we've become, how we've allowed ourselves to become this version of ourselves that we don't desire, that we don't like, that we would rather change, and then taking the necessary steps to do so, whatever it takes. And it takes a lot. So the work is not easy. Like I've never tried to give people a false sense of illusion or security that you step into the work and it's a piece of cake and it's easy and it's a walk in the park. It's hard. And the reason why it's hard is because we've been conditioned all our lives and in society to lay blame and find fault externally to us. And we're never to blame. We're never at fault for anything. So I like to remove those words from our vocabulary and from the projection that that all encompasses, and kind of go, how can I bring this all in and make it about me, but not in a selfish way, around responsibility? And this is where the work starts. And when you start taking responsibility and adopting an attitude of responsibility in for every thought, every feeling, every behavior, every action, every result, and there's a congruency there, that is the beginning of the work.
Yeah. Yeah. So someone posted that question on a men's group on Facebook or something. And so I thought about it for a moment when I think about the work. And what popped in my head was the work is the process of transforming ourselves from who we thought we were to who we were born to be. And
I love that.
That just kind of hit me, because I know when I think back of my 25 plus year journey, and I remember the old me, what he was like, and I think about who I am today, and it's like, wow, it's been an amazing, amazing journey. So for those who are watching, if you hear the term the work, it is really the process of getting to know who you really are. And as Michael just mentioned, we live in a quick fix, instant gratification society, and everybody wants a quick fix, and the work doesn't work like that.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
It's a process, and it is not an easy process, but it is a doable process. And so we're going to talk about some of the things that might support you in doing this work. So Michael, I'm curious, because I believe there's only two things that will cause a man to want to change. One is pain, and the other is what I call divine discontent, which is just that inner knowing, that inner feeling that something is just not right in our lives. So you mentioned the divorce. I'm curious, what really triggered that for you, your transformation?
So you might have heard this story before if you've listened to anything else that I've done, but I'll go through this very quickly for people who are watching or listening to this. What was the turning point for me is about 2 years after the divorce, after the separation, and it had been almost, I was about 3 years after, and it had been almost 2 years since I had seen my children, 18 months to 2 years since I'd seen my children. And I spiraled into such a deep, dark place within myself, anxiety, depression. I couldn't sleep, so I was on sleeping pills. I was on antidepressants. I was abusing alcohol. I was unemployed. I was facing bankruptcy and eviction from my property as well. And so there was all of these things happening. This is me, what's that, 20, nearly 18 years ago. And I was on the edge of my bed one Sunday morning at 7 a.m. And I had a half bottle of wine in one hand and a concoction of sleeping pills, antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication in the other hand. I was about to take my own life to a point where it was like, this is pointless. It's hopeless. I'm useless. There's nothing left for me. I'm a miserable excuse, broken shell of a man, and there's nothing here for me. And maybe my children are just better off without me, and I can't see them anyway. So what's the point? And in that moment, I received a text message from my son, who I hadn't heard from for months. And he was 12 or 13 at the time, maybe slightly younger. And he said to me in the text message, "Dad, we miss you and we love you and we can't wait to see you again."
Wow.
And that was the catalyst, Michael. That was the catalyst. That was the moment where I had this, I can't describe it any other way but an emotional impact. It was such an emotionally impactful moment. And that was the catalyst for me to be motivated to put myself back together and figure out who I'd become so that I could rebuild who I wanted to be. And yeah, that was the catalyst.
Wow. Once again, it's really amazing how similar our stories is, because like yourself, I had gone through a divorce, bankruptcy, foreclosure, depression. I was actually homeless for 2 years, living out of my car.
Yeah, right. Didn't know that.
But my miracle was I was sitting up late one night because I was too depressed to sleep. Now, fortunately for me, I didn't drink or do drugs. I'd have been dead a long time ago. So that was my saving grace. But I was sitting up late one night because I was too depressed to sleep. And I was sitting at the edge of my bed, looking across the room at my bookshelf. And as I looked at the books, I noticed that every book on my bookshelf had something to do with getting rich or making money. And as I looked at those books, this question just popped in my head. Michael, what if you took the same energy and effort you've used in trying to get rich and simply figure out how to be happy? Now, just like the text message hit you emotionally, that question hit me emotionally because all of a sudden, I realized that I hadn't felt happy in a very, very long time.
Yep.
And I had all the stuff, you know, the house, the wife, the 2.5 kids, the vacations and all of that. But I realized that I hadn't felt happy in a long time. And so as a result of asking that question, I stopped reading books on getting rich and making money. I started reading books on psychology, philosophy, spirituality, metaphysics, and went on this amazing journey of transformation that I'm still on today. But it's interesting how we have those pivotal moments that can shift the trajectory of our lives in an instant.
Yep.
And puts us on that journey to wholeness, to really get into a place where there's a part of us that knows what we're capable of, but sometimes it takes what I call that universal wake-up call, that slap upside the head, that cosmic get up and do something different. And unfortunately for most of us as men, it's pain. And so for those of you who are watching, recognize that pain can be a catalyst for your transformation if you're willing to listen to the pain and be willing to do something about it. Michael, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I want to speak into that for a moment because something that I've discovered over the years is that we don't have to wait until we get to that deep, dark place.
Absolutely.
To be motivated to change, right? We don't have to wait. And but you're right in when you say that pain is always the catalyst. But what we could do is this: instead of wait until it becomes so bad and so horrible and so dark that there's no other option but to do something different, what we could choose instead is to pay attention. And a lot of people might have heard this analogy. We talk about the feather, the brick, and the truck. And we get these messages along the way. And the first message is the feather. And the feather just touches you softly and says, hey, something's not right here. You might want to look at that, right? And some men feel that as a bit of a, you called it
divine discontent.
Divine discontent. I've called it a dull ache. We feel this dull ache inside of discontent, using your word, discomfort. And it's like we are conditioned to ignore that and we don't do anything about it. And what I say to people is if you don't listen to that feather, the next time it will be a brick and the brick will come and hit you and it'll be something impactful in your life. It could be something that causes you to lose a lot of money. It could be that your relationship is on the rocks. It could be, anything could happen that causes you to really wake up and go, wow, that was a bit of a jolt. And that's the universe or God saying to us, hey, I tried to tell you with the feather, but you didn't listen. So here's a brick. And then if we ignore the brick, then eventually we get hit by a truck, and the truck is going to be what happened to you and I. It can be homelessness, relationship breakdown, bankruptcy, job loss, all these horrible things that shift our perspective and make us question who we are as individuals and the life that we've created. And then we have to come back from a deep, dark place that we would rather not be in. So I always say to people, it doesn't take the truck. It shouldn't take that much pain for you to make a change.
Yeah, and that's what I love about the work that you're doing, because you're giving men an opportunity to listen to that feather when it hits.
At the very least, the brick. At the very least, the brick. Because we're a bit stubborn sometimes, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want you to think about this, Mike, because you and I have traveled similar paths, and there's so many lessons that we've learned along the way. But I'm wondering if you can share one of those big aha moment you learned about Michael Lauria as you did this work? What did you have a big aha moment that says, oh shit, that's me and I don't want to be that way?
Yeah, well, the one that I explained to you before, that was the biggest one. And
Okay.
along the way, there has been smaller ones, just as significant in different ways, but not as impactful. Because I did learn something from that experience, and that was I don't want to get to anywhere near that again before I pay attention to the signs, pay attention to the awarenesses, pay attention to the little voices, the intuition, the intuitive guidance that says to us, this is not right, or maybe this is better. And so, but I will say there's been moments on my journey where I can honestly say to you that yes, there's been things where I've realized that I need to step deeper into myself for whatever reason that is, whether it's in my intimate relationship, whether it's from a business perspective, business growth, the achievement of the mission, who I need to become as a leader of men, who I need to become as a husband and father. And it's always a constant journey of evolution and shadow work. Carl Jung talks about the shadow, which is the unconscious parts of us that we avoid, deny, and suppress. The things that we don't even like to admit about ourselves to ourselves, let alone the outside world. And so some of the big emotionally impactful things that I have done over the years is be prepared to share my story of Sunday morning on the bed, 7 a.m., alcohol in one hand and pills in the other, about to take my own life. And in the past, there was no way I would say that. I would never have admitted that to anyone, because there was such a deep sense of shame around that.
Right.
And there was a deep sense of shame around losing my children, and a deep sense of shame around who I'd become, and alcohol abuse and bankruptcy and almost homelessness. So when we start to, and so it's been a constant journey of what I like to call, and it's been out there for a long time, self-actualization. And so I think in every moment of our lives, we have the opportunity to self-actualize. And this is where I say we don't have to wait for this big, emotionally impactful, catalytic event for us to become better. We can begin to self-actualize in each moment. And self-actualization is understanding what is your potential. What's your potential? Right? What do you imagine the best version of yourself? How do you imagine he could think, feel, behave, act, the results that he will be getting? And then in every moment, make a conscious choice to become more of that person. And that is self-actualization.
Yeah, and that's the goal, self-actualization. Now, how would I say this? One of the biggest lessons I've learned along the way of my transformational journey was I didn't recognize until after I began this process that I was really a approval-seeking, people-pleasing Mr. Nice Guy. When I was successful, if you will, I thought I had it all together. And if you would have asked my friends and my coworkers and people that knew me, they said, man, that guy's really got it together. But inside, I was just I hid behind this mask of Mr. Nice Guy, completely disconnected from my emotions, completely disconnected from who I am. I was basically living this illusion, this image that I'd created for other people to see. And so I had to start deconstructing all of that. And that's what the work has done for me. It helped me take off those masks and get to know who Michael Taylor really is, without the titles, without the labels, without the stuff. And so one of the things that I learned was the importance of recognizing emotional trauma. And I know men are really uncomfortable talking about emotional trauma. So I want to talk a little bit about how some people go to coaching, but yet there's some deeper emotional traumas that probably need to get resolved before they go to coaching. What are your thoughts on that?
I want to pre-frame this and say that I don't have a very high regard for the coaching industry as a whole,
Okay.
because right? That's the first thing. Not that I think that every coach is not good. I believe that most people have the best intentions. They want to try and help people. But what I've observed in the coaching industry is that there's a lot of what I call wounded healers. And these are people who need to heal their own stuff. And instead of taking responsibility, going into therapy and healing their own traumas, they seek to attempt to heal their own traumas by helping others heal theirs. But what they're really doing is they're actually projecting their own insecurities, their own inadequacies, their own feelings of lack onto their clients and hoping that somehow they can get validated in the experience of helping somebody else. And so I'll say that, first of all, and pre-frame this answer with that. And the second part of this is there are some coaches, and you need to do your research around this. There are some coaches like me who have training in counseling and psychology and trauma therapy and are trauma informed and can hold you through the process of healing your own trauma, but most don't. I was lucky to have started my journey gaining qualifications. So I have qualifications in counseling, psychology, neuroscience as well. And also trauma-informed therapy, Gestalt therapy, CBT, like there's so many modalities that I've studied over the years. So I can help people through all of that, but most coaches can't. Most coaches are mindset coaches. And so they will help you with how to think positively in gratitude and affirmations and focusing on the positive and ignoring the negative. But what they really do is that they don't know how to hold somebody through trauma. So yes, I would absolutely agree with you in that there is a lot of generational, individual, and collective trauma that we all carry. And if we don't seek to heal that before we try to self-actualize, we will sabotage our journey of self-actualization and we will never become the person that we feel that we have the capability of becoming because all of our unconscious trauma will hold us back.
Yeah, and the reason I bring that up is, see, when I first began this process, I was a huge Anthony Robbins fan.
Yeah, great guy.
Yeah, and I did the, walking on hot coals barefoot and all the motivational stuff as I was putting my life back together. But all of that motivation and even some of the spiritual insights that I had was actually a way of avoiding
correct
emotional pain that I had. You use the term shame.
It's called bypassing. It's called bypassing, right?
Yes. And so for me, the greatest lesson that I learned in all of this was I read a book by a guy named John Bradshaw. And the book was called Healing the Shame That Binds You. And it was that book that was the answer to what was driving my behavior. So for example, I succeeded at a very early age. I was very successful at a very early age. So I was driven, and on the outside, it looked like I had it all together. But the truth was, I was so filled with what he calls toxic shame that I was accomplishing all these things because I felt so unworthy, because I felt so inadequate. I was trying to get other people's approval by succeeding.
Yep.
And so it's important that we be willing to do that true healing work, because as you mentioned, there are a lot of coaches out there that will try to motivate you, and coaching is different than therapy. So they're not the same thing.
Very different, very different.
Very different. But what I noticed, kind of like what you were saying, is there's a lot of coaches that haven't really done their work. But they're motivating and they're providing insights. But I believe, and this is just from my own experience, if we aren't willing to make peace with our past, if we aren't willing to heal that trauma. So for example, for me, I possibly had the worst childhood a person could have between the ages of 6 and 13. Every imaginable type of abuse. So those experiences, those traumas, again, was driving me to succeed because of shame. And it wasn't until I healed that shame that I became free, that I was able to connect with my authentic self. And I have to, again, that was a process. And so the point that I want to make here for the viewers is that coaching is wonderful. Works for a lot of folks. There's some good coaches out there. There's some not so good coaches out there. But what I have learned is if you aren't willing to do that inner healing work, no amount of coaching will make you feel complete.
Correct.
That's just my opinion.
I agree with you, Michael. Like I totally agree with you. Totally agree with you. And people often go to coaches as a way of, and you touched on this, as a way of bypassing the pain. They think if I can make more money, gain more significance, get more success, et cetera, then I'll be happy. But the problem is some of them get to that point where they're successful and they have a following and they're an influence or whatever the case may be. But really, when they are alone with themselves, they're miserable and they're depressed because no amount of success, significance, financial rewards, or anything can help us feel fulfilled or ease the dull ache within. Nothing.
Yeah, and that's what I've loved about following you and your work, because you don't bypass. you get to the heart. As I've watched your videos and listened to, read some of your responses to certain questions, it's in complete alignment with what I believe, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show, because I really align with your process of how you engage men in this journey. So with that being said, I want to talk about Forging Excalibur and the amazing platform that you've put together. So tell us a little bit about that platform.
Okay, so Forging Excalibur is all based on my book. Here it is, Forging Excalibur, Rediscover Your Masculinity. So I wrote that in March of 2019. And I wrote that because on my journey of, counseling, psychology, and coaching over, say, almost 15 years back, that was 15 years when I wrote the book. What I noticed is that I was serving men more so than women, but I was serving men, and I noticed that there was a real hesitancy in men reaching out for help, and even admitting to themselves that they should probably do something different to what they have been doing to get different results. And so what I really wanted to do was create a bridge between men feeling that way and feeling a sense of shame about reaching out for help, and something cool and something masculine and something that every boy or every man can connect with and go, wow, that's so cool. And what better than Excalibur and then King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and the journey that men went on to become knights, and who did they have to be, and what virtuous traits and attributes did they have to embody on their journey from man to knight? And then what did a knight actually do? Because we have all of these misconception that knights were savages and that was it. They would just go around and rape and pillage and murder and all sorts of different things. And whilst there was an aspect of that back in medieval times, what I've done is I've extracted all of the good stuff out of that. And the good stuff is they were loyal. There was a code of honor, right? They were courageous. They had strength, inner strength and outer strength as well. They had to be discerning. They were wielding power. They were wielding power and the ability to kill, and they didn't always. So, and plus on their journey, men's journey towards becoming knights, it was about discernment and compassion and service and loyalty and service to the kingdom and contribution to people. So there were all of these things, and I noticed that many men were missing those attributes. And so then the book has turned into a series of programs and a podcast and a TV show, and we've got a Facebook group as well, which I think you're in. And there's about to be there's about to be a launch in about a month of something very, very exciting that's going to engage men from more men from all around the world, because the mission is to positively engage the lives of 1 billion men around the world. That's a B, not an M. So that's a big number, which requires a big platform and a lot of resources. So we've worked hard to get to the place that we are now, and we'll be working even harder to positively engage the lives of 1 billion men around the world.
Fantastic. And I love that vision, because one of my goals is to become a billionaire. Now, I define a billionaire as someone who positively impacts the lives of 1 billion people.
Yeah, cool. It's very, very aligned missions. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one of my goals, and like I said, that's with a B, not an M, because
Yeah.
I'm confident that I can do that. So I'm really glad again to be a partner with you in this process of transforming men's lives, because now more than ever, I think men are hungry for something that nurtures them from inside out, because I think we all long for connection. That's a human need. We want to be connected, but as men, we have been taught that we only had three responsibilities, what I call the three P's: procreate, provide, and protect. But nobody taught us how to connect. And I think that's what men are longing for, connection. Now, again, what I really love about your work is the depth that you take men through with your work, because again, you can listen to a podcast or read one book and think that that's going to change your life. It's not that simple. It's a process of engagement. And not only do you have the process, but you have the support system with your work, where men, I've noticed, come on the site and on the Facebook page and share, some of their breakthroughs, some of the challenges they've gone through. And it's a community of men that are committed to empowerment. And I really love that about your work. So with that being said, though, I want to talk about something that you probably have heard about, everybody's heard about in some form, is this whole term about toxic masculinity.
Oh, we're going to go there, are we?
Yeah, we have to go there. So
We have to, do we? Okay, cool. All right.
Give me your 411 on toxic masculinity.
So I would say there's no such thing as toxic masculinity. I would say there's just masculinity, right? And then what we're labeling as toxic is the expression of some aspects of that, the unhealthy expression of some aspects of that. And so I don't stand for unbound aggression and violence. Okay, I don't stand for any of that. And so what people label toxic masculinity is largely unconscious behavior, but it's still choice. It's still choice. So I'm not condoning horrible things that some people can do. But where we go wrong in society is that we label the behavior as something associated with what it means to be a man and innate masculinity within men. And so, for instance, and we'll go a little bit deeper with this. And so I've often seen news reports of when, tragic things where a woman would get raped, for instance, okay? And what's the title? It's toxic masculinity strikes again, or something to that effect. And it's like, no, you can't do that, because then we're painting all men with the same brush, and we're painting this our innate way of being, which is masculinity. We're painting that as toxic, and then all of a sudden it's bad to be a man, and it's poisonous. Toxic masculinity is toxic to men and toxic to society. And so then men are left thinking, well, what am I meant to do with that? Who am I meant to be? I've got these parts of me that you're calling toxic, poisonous, wrong, bad. What do I do with that? And it's like, what we have to start to realize is that we don't have the term toxic femininity, do we? We only have toxic masculinity, when really what we're talking about is behavior. And men and women are both prone to bad behavior. That doesn't mean that femininity or masculinity is toxic. It means the behavior is bad.
Yeah, and that's the big issue. Because did you see the a year or so ago, maybe 2 years, the Gillette commercial about?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did, Michael.
You remember that?
Yes, I did. Yep. You know what that did? It put all men in this basket of toxic masculinity.
Yeah, and you remember the backlash that came from men because of it?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
So again,
Do you know that Gillette lost? I think Gillette's bottom line went down by about 35-40% or something like that overnight, and it affected them for at least a year or more after that.
Yeah, and I don't think that was their intention.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah, but the thing is, the men who are not doing this work are obviously the ones who really reacted and recoiled because of it.
Yep.
I know when I saw it, I was actually inspired by it. I didn't see an issue, but I knew how it would be perceived.
That's the key, perception.
Yeah. And
That's
so,
the key.
but I was like, okay, I get that. But here's my point. I was on an interview and the lady was talking about toxic masculinity. Like yourself, I said, I don't believe it exists. There's no such thing as toxic masculinity. There's only toxic behaviors, as you just mentioned. And I described it this way. I say masculinity and femininity are two sides of the same coin. They're just energies. So I see masculinity as the energy of doing. And I see femininity as the energy of being. So you have women who have masculine energy. You have men who have feminine energy. But it's really just energy. So you can't label it as toxic because it's just an energy that we have. And when we connect to it authentically, it can't be toxic. The only reason a man will exhibit toxic behavior is when he's disconnected from his authentic masculinity. That's my take on that.
Mm. Mm.
So,
yeah, I would agree with that, and I would also perhaps add to that, if you don't mind, and say that the reason why men behave, and we're talking about men, so but we can apply this to women as well. And so the reason why men sometimes behave badly is because you're right, they're disconnected with themselves. That's yeah, nobody could argue with that. But I would just want to add a depth to that, I think is important. And that is they're not just disconnected from themselves, they are disconnected from who they have the potential to become. Because when men behave that way, they believe that this is just who they are and who they've become, and there's no way that they can move beyond it. Because you never hear, or I haven't, of a man that behaves that way who is working towards his potential, who is self-actualizing, who is doing the work, as we've talked about. Men who are doing the work have healthy relationships. They don't behave badly. They are usually financially wealthy or on the path towards becoming that. They have good relationships with their children, different circumstances for different people, but generally that's the case. And they are in a constant state of conscious self-awareness, and they're constantly looking at themselves, and they're constantly aware of who they are being in each particular moment. And so for a man like that, that kind of behavior is impossible.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Now, one of the challenges men face is isolation. So I want you to speak directly to the man out there who is isolated, maybe going through some challenges in his life, and he doesn't believe anyone can understand his pain. See, because I think that's one of the things that keeps men from asking for help, because the three most difficult words for any man to say is, I need help.
I need help, yep.
I'm convinced of that. So I want you to speak directly to that man who is watching this, and he's probably thinking, or possibly thinking, no one can understand my pain. Speak directly to him. What would you say to him?
So what I'd like to say to you is you're not alone. I was there too, as was Michael. We've all been there, and sometimes we still visit that place. And so there is companionship and connection to be found with other men who are going through exactly the same thing, who are experiencing the same feelings of aloneness and loneliness. And so the antidote to that is to connect with each other, to reach out with the people that you know, people in your circle, and allow yourself to be open and transparent and communicate well, and kind of say, you know what, I would love some company right now. And you would be surprised how many men would say, yes, me too. And then the connection happens.
Yeah. And that's what we need. That's what we long for, is that connection. So it's about being courageous enough to say those three simple words: I need help. Once you do that, that's the beginning of the process. So, Michael,
and we don't even have to. A lot of men would hear that, Michael, and say, and they would say, yes, I understand, but they won't actually do it. So there's other things that we can say too, as opposed to I need help. We can say, hey, let's catch up, or do you want to do it? Do you want to jump on a Zoom call, or have you got 5 minutes for a chat? Such simple things that don't need to have that charge behind it, like the charge that I need help has behind it.
Yeah, and I don't mean directly to say those words, but internally to tell ourselves that
Absolutely.
we need help. That's the key. So yes, I agree that you don't want to go, so hey man, I need help. That's not the right approach. So that's a great distinction you made there. So Michael, now I want to talk about the other side of healing, because as men, for those of us who have done this work, and for those who may be struggling and trying to figure out if they can get to the other side, there's the other side. So I want to kind of focus on the other side a little bit. So tell me, as a result of the work that you've done, how are your intimate relationships in your life these days?
Okay, wonderful. The one word answer is wonderful, fulfilling. But I will say the work never ends. You start doing the work and you continually do the work. You continually do the work, because it's like a car. We're like cars. Our minds and our consciousness are like cars. You can drive a car and you can put petrol in it, and you can put gas in it. You can do all the things to keep the car running and drive places, but eventually things are going to start to break down. And one day the car just won't start. So just like a car, it requires maintenance, daily maintenance. It's like the work never stops. But what I will say, my relationships are a lot more connected. I'm a lot more highly regarded in my circle. And some people would look at my life and say, well, Michael is successful, but I don't like to use that word because it has too many connotations to it. And what I say is I'm fulfilled. I feel fulfilled, and I'm constantly seeking to feel more fulfilled, right? In the actualization of the Forging Excalibur mission and serving men all around the world. And so, but I still do the work because I'm still growing, and the mission is growing, and the movement's growing. And so I need to continue to become better and better and better and work towards my highest potential all the time. And so I have a coach too, and I'm part of a shadow work group where we really delve deep into the shadow representations of ourselves that we see on the surface that sometimes we're not aware of. And that helps us to become more embodied, integrated men, and to become leaders. So the work never stops, but I will say that as you do the work, as you begin, you step onto the hero's journey, you accept your call to adventure and you embark on your hero's journey, immediately your life changes, immediately your mindset shifts, immediately things start to feel better, simply because of who you have become as a result of making that one choice to begin the work. And then as you do the work, you notice incremental changes along the way. And then it has an exponential compounding effect over time.
And with that being said, what impact has doing your inner work had on you as a father?
I've become a lot more present and conscious with my children. I've become a lot more able to meet them where they are. And when I say a more conscious parent, I mean the relationship that I have with my two older children has always been disruptive as a result of the fact that there was divorce and separation, and I wasn't able to be there, not by choice, but I wasn't able to be there during their most formative years. And so those relationships have always been disruptive in many ways. And so one thing that I've learned to be a better father to them, even though I don't often get to be a father to them now, because of those fractures and because of that disruption over time, is to allow them the space and time to grow as individuals. And then when they are ready to reconnect and have a good quality, healthy relationship with me, they will. Whereas in the past, I was always seeking to force those relationships. And these days, what I've learned to do is sort of go, no, you're on your journey, and I have to accept the fact that you're on your hero's journey, and at some point, you'll find your way back. Yeah. And so for me, that's been one of the things that's been a big lesson for me. And now I have a 4-year-old daughter, and being consciously present with her as well, and understanding that she has needs and she wants me around, and to be present with her and to understand that her reactions to different things, because at 4, they don't know how to regulate their emotions, and nor should they be able to or have to. But in the past, there'd be anger. The anger would come up within me when there'd be noise and there'd be chaos and mess and everything. And these days, as a more conscious, self-aware individual, I'm able to meet her where she's at.
Beautiful, beautiful. And last but not least, when we commit to doing our work, I'm absolutely convinced that it's possible for us to find our passions and our purpose. Now, I've come to understand or believe that everything does happen for a reason. And I'm absolutely convinced that every adversity in our lives brings us a gift and a lesson if we're willing to look deeply enough. Now, as I think back to my divorce and bankruptcy and all of that, which were the most painful times in my life, as I look back in retrospect, I now see that my divorce was the absolute best thing that ever happened to me. Because without my divorce, I would have still been trapped in that corporate job that I didn't like. I would have still been in a marriage I didn't really like, didn't want to be in.
Yep.
And I would have never found my unique gifts and talents of writing and speaking. And so in finding those gifts and talents and then figuring out a way to use those gifts and talents to make the world a better place, I have connected to my purpose. So can you talk a little bit about finding your passion and purpose as a result of doing your inner work?
So that's a really great question, because one of the things that men miss most of all in their lives and are disconnected from is a sense of meaning and purpose in their lives. And so what I've observed, not just in myself, but in all of the men that I've helped over the years, is once you create a sense of purpose in life, once you connect to who you wish to become and what you wish to do in the world, and that's around purpose, then all of a sudden, magically almost, every day has meaning. Everything that you do has meaning. Everything that you do has purpose. And so that is at the core of my work. I have this program called The Hero's Journey, and one of the key components in there is purpose, finding purpose. And people talk about this, and they've been talking about purpose for years, and it sounds like a really fluffy concept, but it's not. It's this real anchoring, well-defined purpose that if anyone says, what do you do with your life, or whatever question they ask, these men can say, this is my purpose. This is what I do in my life. It gives my life meaning. It helps me to be of service and contribution to other people, and it will aid in assisting me to leave a legacy after I'm gone. And what a powerful statement it is for a man to be able to say that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, what role does spirituality play in your life?
Oh, the central, it is the central component of my whole life. There's a belief in a higher power. There is, I believe that we all have that divine spark within us. In the Bible, Jesus said, the kingdom of God is within, right? And so when we begin to understand that, you know, there's so much in the Bible that we can connect with and go and really help us to become better quality men, that is the one, you know, when I combine that with what Socrates said around know thyself, the kingdom of God is within, and Socrates said, know thyself, that is the core of everything. Because when we know ourselves and when we understand the kingdom of God is within, think about that for a second. The kingdom of God is within. What does that mean? Everything is within us. Everything that we seek, every little slice of heaven that we want to experience is available to us within us. We just have to know how to connect with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a former atheist, I remember there was a time in my life when you even mentioned the word God, I would get defensive and I wouldn't hear a word you were saying because I was so close-minded to the idea. But the problem was it wasn't God that I had the problem with. It was what I was taught about God that I had the problem with.
Yeah,
So,
well, I mean, you've just got to look at the Old Testament. Like, who the hell is going to want to, like, that's not a very nice God. The God that the Old Testament represents God to be is not the sort of person that I would that I would be inspired to follow.
Yeah.
I would be inspired to follow that God purely from fear of God. What's going to happen if I don't? Right. But then you look at the New Testament and it's a very different God. And even if you don't connect with God, like there's universe, there's source, you can call it whatever you want. It doesn't matter. I think it's all part of the same energy. It's the same intention. It's the same. They're the same values. They're the same way of living. They're at the core, it is about being a good person.
Yeah, and I relate. I call it divine intelligence. That resonates for me, and it just
that's
works. Divine intelligence is always within me. I believe that wholeheartedly. Now, with that being said, I want you to share with how people can find you if they're interested in your work and want to maybe work with you or read your books or whatever. How do they find you?
Cool, thank you. So I have a Facebook group for men called Forging Excalibur, Creating Knights from Men. There's a Facebook group. There's also forgingexcalibur.com and michaellauria.com.au as well.
And I can't recommend his work highly enough. Like I said, I've been doing this work for a long time. I've read a gazillion books, followed a lot of guys. And Michael, I have to admit that you have one of the most thorough, if you will, processes of supporting men in becoming the grandest version of themselves. So it is my absolute honor and privilege to have had you on the show.
Oh, you're so welcome, Michael. That's very kind of you to say that. Thank you so much.
And so with that being said, now I want to give you an opportunity for your last words of wisdom that you want to share with the audience, whatever's on your heart to share.
Whatever's on my heart. So right now in the world that we live in, there is an increasing need for men to step into that warrior energy but not the unbound warrior, the warrior that practices discernment, the warrior who can protect his family, provide for his family, and know what he stands for, know what he stands against, and be powerful in and strong and courageous in that stance.
Wow. There's so much power in taking a stand for something.
There really is.
So much
there really is.
So much power. Well, my friend, I just want to say thank you for spending an hour with us. I really appreciate you. I love you, brother. I love what you're doing, the impact that you're making on the world. And I'm glad to be a partner with you in this process of male transformation. So thank you for showing up for us today.
Thank you, my friend. My honor.
So again, I believe, this is just Michael Taylor's belief, the greatest challenge we have on the planet right now is to redefine masculinity. And we need men like Michael who are sharing insights and information that can support and empower us to become the best versions of ourselves. Because as I mentioned earlier, men aren't the problem. Men being trapped in an antiquated paradigm of masculinity is the problem. But you can shift that paradigm by simply making a choice to do so. So remember, don't believe the hype. The future is brighter than you think. We'll see you next episode. Take care.
HYPE. Don't believe it.
Coach Michael Taylor. Irrepressible optimist with a passion for the impossible. Empowering people to transform their lives from the inside out.